Hey ICM, welcome to the last video from your canceled PD on classes and objects. The last topic we're going to cover is classes and multiple objects, and this is assuming that you have at the very least gone through the bubble code along in the last video. If you've not done that already, please go back and do it because we will be building on top of that code. If we wanted, so in the past video, we made a few objects. We ended by making two bubbles, and we realized that it's super easy to just make a new bubble once that class and those methods have been created, because that new object will inherit all of those properties and all of those methods and all of those things that you don't then have to keep recoding over and over and over. If I asked you to make 10 or 100 or 1,000 of those bubbles, you would still be probably pretty frustrated because that would still mean you making 10 or 100 or 1,000 objects. There's also a world where maybe you want bubbles to appear when something happens. Maybe like you code in a fish, you click on the fish, he makes a bubble. And you might not, like there's not a world where you can make that happen and also have a variable kind of waiting in the wings like that. So we're going to figure out how we can navigate that now. And the secret to that navigation is classes and arrays. So rather than making many variables, we're going to create a single array, and we're just going to add those objects into the array. So they're not going to have a variable name to be called by, they're just going to have an array position. This can be a little confusing if you're not familiar with arrays, but arrays are actually very much like another class. I think they are in fact considered a class in JavaScript. They have their own properties, they have their own methods, and they work really well together. There's like a whole world of stuff that has to do with arrays that we did not and do not cover in this course. If you're interested, there's a link on this slide where you can learn more and more things that you can do with them. Like everything, this course is just, tip of the iceberg, very, very tip. And I would encourage you that if there's things that you want to try to do or try and figure out, or like ideas you have for a program, to do a little Googling on your own or reach out to people through the Slack, and we can always help you learn those things that maybe you didn't from just our curriculum. So classes and arrays, we've seen that classes have methods like .length, which we've used. .push is a really helpful one, which adds to an array. .splice can remove elements for an array. They're super useful. And we're just going to kind of dive into coding and making many. So we're going to work wherever your bubble class definition is. I, in mine, have left my entire bubble class definition. This is exactly as I ended it in the last code along video. The thing I have done is remove that bub1, bub2 variable. I have made no bubbles so far. The class just exists. And the only reason why I got rid of those is because I want to make it really clear where things are coming from in this next section. So I don't have to worry about this class. Again, if you don't have it, please pause, go back to the last video to make sure that you can get all of this into your code. These are my bubbles that move around the screen pretty consistently and they bounce off the edges. So to make many, the first thing I am going to need to do is create an array for myself. So I'm going to call this bub array because I'm too lazy to spell out bubble, and this makes sense to me. And to start, I'm just going to set bubble array equal to an empty array. So I'm setting it equal to these two square brackets, which you find between your P and your backslash key on the upper right side of your keyboard. This just tells the computer that this is an empty list. So the way I describe this to students and the way I think of it is like those sticky grocery lists that maybe your parents or you have stuck on your refrigerator or somewhere in your kitchen. It's already a list, it's set up, it has lines, it's like waiting to receive things, and we know that it's supposed to be a list, we just haven't added anything to it yet. And this is really important because the first thing we're going to do here is start adding things to this array, and if it was just a variable, or if it hadn't been declared yet, the computer would not know how to handle that. So in setup, I'm going to use a for loop to work into this array. So if we recall, for loops have three parts. They always start with a variable. Usually that variable is I in for loops, but you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to start my variable at 0. It has a condition that's met, so I'm going to say that while I is less than 5, because I just want to make a few bubbles here. Actually, you know what, let's do less than 10. As soon as this condition is met, we're going to be done. And then it increments the variable somehow. So I'm going to say that I plus equals 1. I'm just going to increase by 1 every time. And if we are adding 1, a cool piece of syntax that I don't think we've directly taught you yet is you can just say I plus plus. I plus plus will just add 1 to whatever I is or whatever the variable is. It does not let you control the number you're adding. It's just 1, but it is a syntax you'll probably see if you Google this solution anywhere. And within here, I'm going to add bubbles to my array. So to do this, I'm not going to use a method. I am just going to say bub array, and I'm going to use those square brackets. And inside those square brackets, I'm going to put I, which is this iterative variable that's changing every time my loop is run. So the first time my loop runs, this I variable is 0. The second time it runs, it's 1, then 2, then 3, all the way up until my loop is done running. And essentially what this is saying is go into that empty list, go to that I spot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. They're all secretly there, even though we haven't added things to them or built them out yet, and do something to that spot. So the thing that I'm doing is I'm saying I don't want that to be an empty line anymore. I want to be a new bubble, and we said that bubbles need to be given an X and Y location, so I'm going to say it's going to be random for both, anywhere 0 to 400. Just make that new bubble. And then if I console log, oops, not the whole thing, back. So that is all happening inside my for loop. Outside my for loop, still inside setup, if I console log bub array, we are going to see that we have bubble, 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 all inside that array. And you'll also notice that when you console log a list of objects like this, you have this click down arrow. If I click down into it, you will see each index value starting with 0 all the way up to, I believe it goes to 9. My screen is cutting it off, I apologize. I have all these bubbles, and I can click into them to see specific X, Y values, diameters, speeds. I'm getting some really crazy numbers because I did not say that they needed to be rounded to integers. So I have some wild decimals. But these are all my bubbles as they exist. And as we notice, we've created these bubbles. They exist in the world. They're not displaying on my screen. And it could also be very exhaustive for me to go through and for every single one of these bubbles, try and call it from the array, bub array 0 dot display, bub array 0 dot move. So rather than trying to do that, I'm just going to use another for loop that's going to walk through every bubble and give it a command. And because I want these to move forever, and I want them to keep going through, I'm going to do this in draw because the draw function runs forever. It's not only going to run this loop in a cycle, but it's going to keep running the loop over and over and over and over again, like a washing machine that just won't stop. So to do this, I can keep using a for loop. I will also, if we have time, show you another method to work with here. I'm going to say that for var I, which also starts at 0, and it goes until I is less than the length of the array of my bubbles. I can never remember here if this needs to be inclusive or exclusive, if this should be less than or equal to, or just less than. This is what I need. And then I'm going to increment I by 1 every time, so I'm going to use that new syntax, I++. Then, just like everything else that I am defining, I start with a curly brace, I end with a curly brace. And inside here, I'm going to tell every single bubble what to do. So I'm going to say that inside bub array, that I iterative variable, which again, first it's going to be 0, my first bubble. Second time it runs, it's going to be 1, my second bubble. Then 3, my third bubble. Sorry, 2, my third bubble. That I will keep changing. For every value in my bub array, I want the bubble to display. And I also want that same bubble to move. So now if I play, I should have bubbles appear on the screen, and I should have them move all over the place. Oh, why are you mad at me? Bub array.length is not a function. Oh, because it's just a method like this. There we go. So now I have bouncing bubbles that go all over the place, everywhere in my code. And I could make more bubbles if I wanted to. Up top here, I could change this to 20. And we'll now see that I have infinitely more bubbles. I could even change this to 100, and I should have like bubbles on bubbles on bubbles, bubbles everywhere. To make my life easy, I'm going to keep it at 10. And I'm just going to very briefly show you, you know what, I'm not going to show you that. If you are interested, there is a for loop that is especially for items in an array. It just kind of takes this really common pattern of iterating through array items one at a time, and it simplifies it for you. If you're interested, I'm just going to redirect you to that W3 Schools site, and you can figure it out on your own. Something I will show you that I think is really useful is that you can change things about your bubbles. So for example, I could write in a method called bub_clicked that will check and see if I'm clicking on a bubble, and it could adjust the size of my bubble. So let me think of how I'm going to do this here. I'll make something that shrinks all my bubbles. So I'm going to write inside my for loop a conditional statement. I'm going to say that if mouse x is greater than 200, I'm going to change bub array I. So again, that's going to loop through every bubble. I'm going to change the diameter to 25. Otherwise, I'm going to change the diameter to 50. And this is something we haven't gone over too much, but is really useful. Anytime you call an object dot a property, it's like you're accessing that variable. So I am saying that whatever the diameter was before, resave it to 25. Whatever the diameter was before, save it to 50. This is very similar to things you've seen before, just without the object name in the front, because you guys have been making variables and changing their value all year. So if I play this now, it's going to be checking. What do you mean unexpected end of input? Where did I mess things up? Oh, I forgot to close my for loop. Oops, it's embarrassing. This is also a great time to use edit tiny code to just bop everything into place so that you can tell if you are missing for loops like I am. Okay, so now all these bubbles, their diameter is 50 until I move to this side and they turn to 25, they turn back to 50, they turn back to 25. So you can code in even more useful things that are not just about a general position of a mouse. Again, this is where methods come in really handy. You could write methods that will check if your mouse is on top of a circle, and then you can use that so if you click, something changes about the bubble. Maybe the bubble pops, maybe it changes color, I don't know. But this is kind of yours to explore now. So I would encourage you to think about ways that you could improve upon this project. Think about things you could do to challenge your understanding of objects. And if you check in our slide deck, which obviously now my computer has decided it does not want to load these, and it's going to take a while, I would recommend scrolling all the way down to our last challenge of things you can do with objects. You can keep working with bubbles, you can explore something else on your own. There is just a ton of options out there of how you can use objects. Most things that involve creating games run off of objects, so if you want to try and make some old school arcade games like Snake, Pong, Frogger, all of those would be excellent ways to try and get a solid command of objects and the methods that command them. That is all up to you. I will leave you to that, and I will again strongly encourage you, if you do decide to go through these lessons, to reach out with any questions, comments, philosophies, theories, or even just to share really cool things you've made. Have fun!